to act for... I'll start again. Welcome everybody to Act for Inclusion's launch event. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Sandra Daniels and I'm the facilitator of Act for Inclusion, and I'll be chairing this evening's meeting. Act for Inclusion are striving to make our Zoom sessions as accessible as possible. So before we start the launch meeting, here are some guidance points. So this meeting will be recorded so that people can watch again in their own time. So if anybody does not wish to be recorded, please switch off your video and change your visible name. The host and co-host will be keeping you muted when not speaking, as the background noise can be very distracting. If you can please raise the electronic hand if you wish to speak. If this is not possible, please make yourself known to the hosts at the beginning of the meeting and they will look out for you. So just to say, is there anybody that is going to find the Zoom hand difficult or inaccessible? Just now make a signal, put your hand up so that we can watch out for you. So the Zoom chat will be turned off, as we feel there is a barrier to accessibility for some people. The chat will only be used by the hosts and the co-hosts so they can give information or make announcements. But we will open the chat for everybody during the break and sort of just at the end of the meeting as well. If people want to, put something in the chat, put a link or so on in the chat or some sort of information. We'll be using the live transcript to provide subtitles. This is Zoom's built-in subtitles. So they're just visible by default, but you can hide them by clicking on CC live transcript button within your Zoom meeting instructions. So if you want them off, that's the way to do it. So now I'm going to open the meeting and I'm going to give a speech really, and the speech really is about setting the scene for tonight. So I will start. So as Act for Inclusion's facilitator, it's with enthusiasm that I open tonight's meeting and now set the scene for tonight's launch event. During our AGM in May, we did more than agree to change our name. We also agreed a new vision and strategy. We believe our vision for the future is bold and transformative, one that puts people's choice, control and lifestyles first. At the heart of this commitment to developing community-based services with the potential to generate green and purple jobs, to reduce our ecological footprint and build an inclusive society. Alongside our new vision, we have a fresh strategy involving strengthening cuts and resisting cuts, safeguarding and working towards deinstitutionalisation, as well as exploring how best to use community-based eco approach to deliver inclusive and sustainable services. In each of the areas, we intend to outline short, medium and long-term goals. Tonight, our launch will hear from speakers from campaign bodies Act for Inclusion hope to work alongside in the future to tackle the crisis within social support. Our vision and strategy grew out of difficult and uncertain times for disabled and older people, and emerged from discussion, lived experience, and the opportunity to work together in co-production. We realised that our vision and all we do requires us to go beyond reclaiming, fixing or integrating the failing current system we call adult social care. We truly need to build a better future for all people and our environment. To achieve this, we need to develop an eco-social approach towards a new system of support, which has its foundations rooted in the social model of disability and the disabled people's independent living movement, but also with the added responsibility to understanding and incorporating natural ecosystems into the way forward for us for social support. So why are ecosystems so important? Ecosystems are a network of interactions among organisms and between organisms and their environment. It is possible to interconnect with social environments and therefore pay explicit attention to the social, institutional and cultural contents of people's environmental relations. Ordinary lifestyles are interdependent. What happens in households, streets and communities, cities and the planet impacts upon us all. The pandemic taught us this in stark terms. For disabled people's emancipation to be truly realised, we have to be part of the conversation around climate change and climate change risk, and also the solutions to preserving the planet and creating an accessible society where all life is valued. In order to remove disabling barriers or social restrictions, we need to address all the systems that impact upon human existence. So using the example of interconnectedness amongst organs, we can't just address our lives and interactions in isolation. Social support needs to be viewed in terms of the need to address climate change and sustainability at the same time. Inclusion recognises that we are at the start of the development of an eco-social approach, and we want to work with disabled people of all ages in leading this development. We also recognise the importance of working with our non-disabled members, other organisations and trade unions in tackling the issues involved. So we have a lot to do to challenge this corrupt and oppressive system faced by disabled people. And this will only be possible by working together, listening and trusting each other, and reinforcing Greta Thunberg's message to our government. Enough of the blah, blah, blah. So I'm just trying to find the agenda, sorry. So now I'd like to welcome Nadia Haddon and also Tess Van Dijs, who are European Network of Independent Living. They're going to talk about deinstitutionalisation, which we know is one of the core principles of the disabled people's movement within the UK. So over to Nadia and Tess. I'm not sure who's going first.
I'm going to start. Are you going to share the PowerPoint? Okay, thank you. Well, good evening to all of you, and thanks a lot for the organizers to having Enil with you tonight for such an important topic, inclusion. And so we're going to focus a little bit why deinstitutionalization is our core campaign. Can go to the next slide, please. Okay. So Enil is a European network on independent living. We are a non-profit organization and we are a grassroots organization. We are spread over more than 42 countries, so even further than those within the EU itself. And we started in 1989 in Strasbourg by some activists. And since then, the principles of independent living were self-determination, self-representation, choice and control, and deinstitutionalization since that moment already. So we still have more than 1.5 million of European citizens who are locked inside institutions. And it is not counting the others who are institutionalized at their own home, isolated due to lack of services, due to cuts, and due to lack of political engagement. So we work a lot on access to a lot of mainstream services in order to be able to participate within society and same level as all the others. Okay, you can go, yeah. So one of the founders of ENIL is Adolf Ratzka, and he always said that, in fact, what does we mean by independent living? So for him, independent living is having the same range of option and the same degree of self-determination taken for granted by non-disabled people. So this includes the opportunity to make choices and decisions regarding where to live, with who to live, and how to live. So to
Sorry, can
resume
you
this,
slow down, please? I'm really struggling to understand you.
yeah,
I'm hard
okay,
of hearing, and you're way ahead of the captions. I'm
okay.
sorry, I put it in the chat, but no
Wow,
one's noticed.
I will slow down. Okay, thank you. So in fact, for us, independent living is just the right to be ordinary. But you can go to the next slide, please. So independent living is not possible without some pillars. For example, accessibility to buildings, and not only physical accessibility, but also access to information that all type of person with disability can use that kind of information. Also accessible and affordable transport, and also assistive technologies and equipment is something very important to be able to realize independent living. We speak a lot about one the biggest problem to bring people out of institution are affordable, accessible, and housing within the society. And one of the best services that we consider from the independent living movement is having personal assistants that follow the person wherever he goes. We also do a lot of lobbying about employment within the regular sector to have also decent incomes, access to regular education, and having also the opportunity to do peer support. It's something very important to be able to be really inclusive in the society. You can go to the next slide. So for us, deinstitutionalization is really a political and a social process that must provide a shift from institutional care and other isolating and segregating settings to independent living. So the I, we call it the I. So effective deinstitutionalization is really when we place the people inside the society and give them an opportunity to become a full citizen and take control of his own life with the support needed. So whatever the support degree is, we make no different any distinction. So all people deserve to live within society. And DI is also about preventing institutionalization in the future, and especially ensuring that young children from young on grow within the family, within the society, to enable them to be part within the society and not being isolated and segregating stuff. So what are the bases that we use to realize this? We have the conventions on the right of person with disabilities that everybody knows, Article 19 in it. And we also have the general comment where really there is written very clear the obligation of the states. I will not go through them, it's just for information. And also the obligation not only to fulfill, but also to respect and to promote the rights of independent living. There is still a lack of it. And we can go to the next slide where we can see the strategies that can be used to realize this deinstitutionalization. So when we ask the governments to realize the strategy, they must contain specific time frames and adequate budgets. So we need to do the transition. So to do the transition, it must be very clear within it which are we targeting, and also involve people from all different levels. It must eliminate all forms of isolation, segregation, and institutionalization of persons, because in some countries we see they started to build small group homes to put people there in temporarily. But we may notice that once a group home is there, it's for generations. So we should not be satisfied with temporal solutions. Also, we need to have special attention for persons with psychosocial and or intellectual disabilities and children, because most of the time the governments wanted to overprotect them, and also the parents and the society find it very necessary to put them in separate settings to be sure that now nothing happened to them. So also, like I said, we need to make every person participate personally and to their representative organization and the design and the implementation of such strategies. And it requires a mechanism to monitor this implementation on each level. So we started in a campaign, we can go to the next slide, to watch over the European funds, the European investment and structural funds, and how they are used to realize deinstitutionalization.
Placing persons with disabilities into institutions is a form of
You need to
discrimination.
click on the,
Institutionalization leads to segregation and social exclusion and is not compliant.
we don't see the clip.
Oh, that's weird. I'm seeing it. 1 second. All right, I'm going to stop and then, because I'm trying to show it and I'm seeing it move, but there's a problem. 1 second. Give me a second. Okay, let's see what happens now.
Okay, but just in the meantime, it's a campaign that we started because we saw there was a lot of misuse of the European structural funds that a lot of countries use not in line with the CRPD or the general comment, and not supporting the people to go back and live in the society, to become decent citizens like all the others.
Ugh. I don't know what happened. 1 minute.
No.
Yeah, my computer is crashing. Ah. 1 minute. Oh, for God's sake. See if it's working.
No. Do you want me to share? If you give me the
Yes,
permission?
please, if you could.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Placing persons with disabilities into institutions is a form of discrimination. Institutionalization leads to segregation and social exclusion and is not compliant with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Article 19 of the Convention requires that all persons with disabilities are provided with the right to live independently and to be included in the community. Countries across the European Union benefit from the so-called European Structural and Investment Funds, or in short, ESI funds. One of the priority areas supported with the ESI funds is the process of deinstitutionalization. This involves closing down institutions and developing community-based services for persons with disabilities, such as providing them with housing and personal assistance. The problem is that many EU countries use ESI funds to build smaller institutions instead of ensuring that persons with disabilities can live in regular apartments and houses, alone, with their partners, families, or friends, with the support they need. Countries simply replace bigger institutions with smaller facilities accommodating 6, 12, 30 people or more. They are effectively using these funds in ways contrary to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and EU laws. They are denying persons with disabilities a chance to decide where, with whom, and how they live. Since 2007, disability rights groups have been warning about the misuse of ESI funds. They have been raising awareness about the problem by publishing reports, sending complaints to the European Commission, the European Ombudsman, and even filing a case to the EU General Court in Luxembourg. Their aim is to stop investment of ESI funds into institutions of any size and to ensure that as taxpayers, our money is used to develop genuine community-based services. If you know about any situation where EU funds are used to build or renovate institutions for persons with disabilities, report this to ENIAN and get involved. Together, we can make our voices heard and make sure that institutions are closed down rather than modernized or simply replaced. Only then we will be a step closer to making sure all persons with disabilities have the right to live independently and to be included in the community.
Okay, and just now it's to show a little bit how with this campaign how we wanted the structural funds to be used instead of renovating, like they said, developing alternatives in the community that facilitate independent living. Also build instead of building group homes or living centers, increase the social housing stock, purchasing regular apartment and houses in the community, and also making apartments and houses in the community more accessible. And the funding that the special or paralyzed service like daycare center, shelter with employment, of special schools, all that money should go back to mainstream services and make those accessible, available to disabled people, and also encourage from young of on that there is really diversity. And it's not only for persons with the physical disability, but all type of disability. So all persons with disabilities need to be enabled to be part of the society. We went to court, for example, for this case. This is one of the results of our campaign. This is in Hungary. They used a lot of structural funds, like you see, to build new, smaller institutions 300 kilometers further than the previous one they had. So even families did not have public transport anymore to go to visit. And as you can see, what they call independent living, they have a daily shame that they are obliged to follow all the steps. So there was no self-control, no self-determination. They could even not choose the color of their own room where they were supposed to sleep in. But it was at least promoted like we really closed down the big institution of 500 persons, but they built 10 small ones for 50 people. So it was still the same regime, and it was not really
Sorry,
inclusion.
can I ask a question, please? What is a daily shame? I didn't understand. What is a daily shame?
You can see, for example, it's a program of every day. They need to wake up at this hour. Breakfast is from this hour to that hour.
Oh, I see. Regimented, right? Thank you.
Yes. You're welcome.
Not the right to choose to have go theater of cinemas. If you want to go alone with friends to theaters of cinema, you must ask it before more than what beforehand to the institution to where to go, where this car is free.
Yeah, and even to call your friends or family, you need to ask for permission the day before. So now I'll hand over to Tess, who's one of our board members. So Tess, the floor is yours. You can tell your story.
Yes, my name is Tess. I have autism and normal and Tess is 30 years old and living alone. Once in a week comes a personal assistant to help me with household tasks, communication, administration. In my childhood, I got go to special school where I learn maths, reading, writing. Because of that time, all the lessons too easy for me. And I have also read that the special schools not stimulate my child to go hero scouts or the free times activities like dancing. For when I'm 20s, I get into things like in my free time to get learn language and adult education like Swedish, Danish, Spanish, German, and also creative courses like photography and writing. I got much diplomas and exams. I got not a prefer as a teacher, but the results of my exams are the same as the rest. And what all the rules are. And in Flanders, we also stimulate adults and children to get to special schools, because it's a story from 200 years ago. Het Catholicism that they want to take care to the nuns and the priests, so a school to get segregated to learning met householding tests like that, and live laws since 2012, and before that from 2003 to 2012 in a small institution with 3 other people, and the institution for 3 other people is between a classic institution and to live free. You have all little rules, but not fixed to eat and to sleep. A little bit just from 2012 to 2020. I got my first flat at myself from March 2000. Got a letter in the second week of the lockdown. I must go to my rent flat because there are other owners, and I got panic. I must get out of 1st of October, and die flat was daarbij 480 per maand, and so little apartments under 600 euros per month. It's difficult to find it in the city, and my parents got a solution. They bought a new flat for me in the same neighborhood as my first rented flat, in, because I can live in until when I must go to the resting home, and I paid back with the same rent amount house as in my previous apartment, and I have also nog money to get buying eating, buying internet, and like that, and mistakes to my disability. I get it at a lower tariff. But some people with disabilities don't know how to get the right of use social tariff for electricity, gas, water, like that. It was a soft introduction of my situation.
Okay, thank you very much, Tess. And I'm really happy to hear that you manage all these daily details by yourself now, instead of sharing it with the other in the small group home where they have putting you for so many years, where you could even not choose what you were going to eat at night. So the quality of life is much better, I think, being included in society, and now you can do all your activities by yourself and then share it. So this was just to illustrate a little bit why we are campaigning and why we are still going on to work on the deinstitutionalization. We could block some European investment funds in several countries because people were, as soon as they see that there is misuse, we join forces with organizations like Validity International and like Disabled Right International. So I went to the Ombudsman, we went also to the court, and we tried to avoid that new institutions are built. So I launched again the call, wherever you see something going in the wrong direction, please, before the damage is done, give us a sign, and then we can join forces and try to stop new institutions or refurnishing of institutions to be done. Thank you very much for your attention. And this is a picture of our freedom drive, where you see a lot of people in front of the commission and law in order to say, free your people now, and that institutions are not a solution. So thanks a lot.
Thanks for that. Thanks very much, Nadia and Tess. That was really interesting. We will have an opportunity in the second half of the meeting to have an open discussion. So You can ask some questions or make comments on what the speakers have spoke about. So, because we've got a very tight agenda tonight and we've got lots of people to speak. So the next person, the next speaker is Mark Harrison. Is Mark here from ROFA?
Yeah, I'm here, Sandra.
Hi there, Mark.
Hi.
Yeah, so Mark's going to talk about the National Independent Living Support Service campaign. So I'm going to hand over to Mark. So over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Sandra. So I think this fits really well with the previous ENIL speaker, because the NILS campaign, the campaign for a National Independent Living Support System and Support Service, comes out of the campaign to save the ILF, and the Independent Living Fund supported disabled people to live independently in the community. And what we've seen alongside the erosion of our rights through the closing of the Independent Living Fund and the disaster that is the broken social care system, we've also seen alongside that the reinstitutionalisation of disabled people in the UK. So things are going backwards. And so NILS is disabled people's vision for how we can implement the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People, all the articles of the UN Convention, as well as in detail Article 19. And NILS is about a whole system change. It covers every aspect of society, and it's about removing all the barriers to living equal lives, whether that be in the environment, in housing, in education, employment or training, in the law, in attitudes, all of those things. And it embraces ENIL's vision, the 12 pillars of independent living and the social model of disability. And the support part, which is what I'm going to talk a bit more about tonight in detail, is to give disabled people the personal assistance needed to live independently in the community, equal and active lives. And it's about replacing the dysfunctional and outdated system of social care. So NILS is not about reforming social care. NILS is about replacing social care, which builds in dependency, it rations services, and as we've seen during COVID, results in tens of thousands of deaths, both in institutions, but also in the community for people who aren't getting any services, or have been assessed as needing services, but can't afford them because they're being charged and they have to give them up. So we want to sweep away that system of paternalism and dependency creating services and replace it with a comprehensive legal right to independent living delivered through a national independent living service. And I'll just run through some of the key features of the National Independent Living Service. So first of all, it will be free at the point of need use. In a similar way to the NHS, this means that we'll scrap social care charging, we will scrap assessments done by non-disabled professionals, and we will scrap the postcode lottery and the rationing of services that goes on through local authorities in the current system. It will be built alongside the NHS. It won't be part of the NHS because a central feature of it is disabled people. And this is another area of the UN Convention that is often ignored, but that actually disabled people should be in control of our lives. We should have choice and control, and Disabled People's Organisation should be the central part. So nothing about us without us should live through all of these services. The programme will be paid for out of progressive general taxation. So it will be free at the point of need and use, and it will be paid for out of general taxation, not out of regressive national insurance tax rises, but it will be, again, on the similar model to the NHS. And unlike social care, the National Independent Living Support Service will be in the public or not-for-profit sector. It won't be privatised. 95% of social care is delivered through private for-profit organisations. But we're very clear that NILS needs to be in the not-for-profit DPO sector or through developed through co-ops.
Private organizations are expensive than public organizations, and private organizations have better service, but it's too expensive for most of the people with a low income.
Absolutely. In the UK, we had the Independent Living Fund, and this was a separate government agency, but the disabled people were involved at all levels, from recruitment, through management, through running training programs, and designing the systems. And we want to look at what we can learn from the positive aspects of that and scale it up. NILS will be organised nationally but delivered locally. So we will abolish the postcode lottery that exists in social care, where each local authority has separate and different systems, and you can't guarantee from one local authority to another consistency of service. And as I said, disabled people will lead at all levels. It will be based around peer-to-peer support, and this will be essential to its success. And DPOs, disabled people's organisations, democratically accountable disabled people's organisations, will be central to the delivery at local level, alongside a network of centres for independent living in every area. And these will provide a whole range of information, advice, advocacy, peer self-assessment, and a range of independent living services to support people to live in their own homes, so to prevent the need for going into institutions. It will be intersectional in that it will recognise the diversity and intersectional nature of our community, and we will address the racism and sexism and all the other discrimination that goes on in the current social care system. And the central feature will be around deinstitutionalisation for people with learning difficulties, autism, and people in mental distress. And we will bring our mental distress services into the 21st century, and we will close all those institutions that are currently there in line with the UN Convention. It won't be left to chance, so it will be based around legislation, and there will be a legal right and a legal and enforceable right to independent living. And we will bring the whole of the UN Convention into UK law. So there are some things, some really exciting developments that are going on in the UK at the moment, or in England particularly. There are some even more exciting things going on in Scotland and Wales because of devolution, and they're working much more closely with their government. But in England, in spite of our dysfunctional and awful Tory government, the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham have co-produced a whole strategy with disabled people and are now implementing that right across the council. And their aim is to be the best local authority in the country for disabled people. And the changes are being led by disabled people in co-production with senior councillors and senior officers. And they're making every aspect. They've launched a housing strategy. They're turning their social care department into a department of independent living, and all departments are charged with removing the barriers for disabled people. The other exciting aspect that's going on is in Greater Manchester, where the Mayor, Andy Burnham, is working with disabled people's organisation. They've set up a Greater Manchester Disabled People's Panel that represents right across, I think, the 10 or 12 authorities covered by Greater Manchester. So these are things that we think are very positive, and we want to build on. The NILS campaign has been developed by disabled people in ROFA, and Reclaiming Our Futures Alliance. We would encourage everybody to join. It's an alliance of disabled people's organisations and individual disabled people across England. It's free to join, and we would encourage people to get involved with the NILS subgroup, which is carrying the work to the campaign for the service, the support service.
Mark, can I just say 1 more minute? Is that okay?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm just coming to the end, so that's great.
Brilliant.
The NILS vision, as I said, was written by disabled people out of their campaign to save the ILF, and it was really important that we went on the front foot and we laid out very clearly what our proposals, what our vision was. And at the moment, the NILS subgroup and many of the people in Act for Inclusion and others are working to do the details, to drill down to the detail of what it would look like at a local area. And we're also costing our vision. And we're working with economists who's going to help us cost it to see what it will be worth, so we can actually bring it into being. So this isn't an academic exercise. This is our lives. Deinstitutionalization means we have to do it. The final thing I would say is that when the Winterbourne View scandal happened and people saw the abuse that was and the torture that was going on, that disabled people in England were being subjected to in these institutions, the government committed to closing those institutions down. We're now 11 years on, and there are more disabled people in those institutions today than there were at the time of Winterbourne View. So this isn't, as I say, an academic exercise. This is a campaign that's vital. It's part of ROFA's commitment to implementing the UN CRPD, and I would actually urge everybody to get involved. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Mark. That's really good. Yeah, and that all feeds together from the last speaker. Rona has been writing in the chat to me that she's finding to actually remember her question until the discussion point. That's going to be difficult for her. So I think she's got a question for Mark.
Yeah, if I could ask the question now, because
hang on a minute, Rose. So is it just one question to Mark? Is that right?
It is just one question, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I have problems with short-term memory. I have vascular damage from strokes, so I struggle to remember things. So if it's going to be much later on, I won't remember the question. My question is, I got very confused as to what is actually going ahead right now with respect to what Mark was saying. What is going ahead? What is being planned for the future? And what is something that is being lobbied, that the government is being lobbied for? Are these things that you mentioned all things that are happening now, or are they things that are going to happen over the next year? What is the time frame for the deinstitutionalization you were referring to?
Well, as I said right at the end, things are going backwards. It's not that things are happening. We're not working with government because government is ignoring us. So this is a campaign to hold government to account, to speak truth to power, but also hold power to account. So that's why we've been working on these proposals since 2014, 2015. And we're taking our campaign to the next level and stepping it up. But government is operating in the opposite way. As everybody knows, and I spoke about, the pandemic and the fact that tens of thousands of disabled people were killed by the government in the pandemic, and so this is a life and death question. This isn't academic, so it's on multiple fronts. What we're trying to do is to win people over to our vision, to be very clear that social care is dead. It's a broken system that's not functional, and it's not appropriate for the 21st century. It's a 19th and 20th century system that has its roots in the workhouses, and those systems are still there today. You can see them in the mental institutions that sit on the edge of towns, and the practices that go on which brutalize and kill disabled people, particularly people in mental distress. So that's why it's urgent that we develop our ideas, we develop the detail, but we win allies. We also recognize that disabled people can't do this by ourselves. We need allies. We need allies in the social work system. We need allies in the mental health system. We need allies in the political and trade union systems. And that's why we're taking our co-production and our consultation out into those communities to win support. And we are winning support. It's a battle, and Bob and Sandra have done battle with people in the Labour Party who are advocating for a national care service, and we're trying to win them to our vision for a national independent living service, to remove and get rid of those, as I said, those paternalistic aspects of social care. That's why we're trying to say very clearly, this isn't about reforming social care. This is about getting rid of social care, because social care is outdated and outmoded, and replacing it with a 21st century rights that are backed up in legislation and in systems where we have choice and control, and where disabled people are in the lead.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Like I said in my opening comments, tonight we're hearing from organisations that Act for Inclusion want to work closely with. This is not the end of these discussions. I think we need to plan meetings where we talk more to these organisations and have detailed meetings. So thanks for that. Now I'm going to move on to Billy Cooper, who is a care worker, and she's going to talk about care and support workers and organising. So I'm going to hand over to Billy. Billy, if you could keep your speech to 10 minutes, that would be absolutely fantastic.
Oh, great. Thank you, Sandra. I've had some technical difficulties, so I've got my phone balanced on my laptop. So if I suddenly go sideways, I'm sorry. But yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. Yeah, like Sandra said, my name's Billy Cooper. I'm a support worker, and I work in a mental health accommodation service in East London. I'm also a Unite the Union workplace rep, and I'm involved with a group called CASWO, which stands for Care and Support Workers Organise. And we are social care workers who've come together from across a number of different sort of trade unions, with the aims of encouraging trade union membership and organising within the sector, as well as campaigning for better paying conditions for workers and a better social care system for everybody. We believe that social care should be not for profit, it should be free for all, guided by co-production, democratically owned, and have the voices of social care workers, disabled people and others who require support at its centre. Currently, social care relies on the exploitation of a workforce made up overwhelmingly of women and disproportionately of Black, brown and migrant workers. 2/3 of us receive less than the real living wage, and we often find ourselves on precarious 0-hour contracts that offer little in the way of stability. As the Supreme Court's March ruling on sleep-in shifts ensured, we are legally and routinely paid below the minimum wage. I get £30 per night for my sleep-in shifts, which is £3.55 per hour. Failure to pay travel time means we are again often paid below the legal minimum. It's hard to imagine other sectors where this sort of systemic underpayment would be permitted. Professor of Law Lydia Hayes argues that this is due to the, quote, gendered inadequacy of labour law, which devalues the work performed largely by working class women. Given these conditions, it's not hard to see why social care is in the grips of a recruitment crisis. We're a workforce that was already sort of chronically undervalued and then was sort of left exhausted by 18 months on the front line of the pandemic. I think our depleting numbers are pretty unsurprising. The vacancy rate at the moment is rising month on month. At my service, we have a 50% vacancy rate at the moment, which means half of the positions are empty. I talked to a manager in South London the other day who said at one of his services, they don't have any staff left at all, and they're relying entirely on pool and agency workers, which is quite terrifying. I think there is a sort of quite obvious and sort of simple solution to that, sort of short term, and that is pay people more. I think £15 per hour is something that CASRO is campaigning around, and that would sort of bring us closer to the sort of national average salary and will sort of better reflect the sort of work that we do. And I think we are very much aware that increasing wages won't sort of fix social care in any way. We all know that that's, you know, a lot more than that is needed, but it does need to be one of our sort of key demands. I think we need to be rallying around right now because we are losing workers at rates that are very, very worrying. CASPRO started because we knew that tackling the social care crisis required us to work beyond our individual trade unions, that it required us to work beyond the trade union movement. As workers, we know we must organise in solidarity with our communities and those that use services. And CASWO is very much committed to figuring out how we do that, how those of us organising in the trade union movement, the disabled people's movement, those of us involved in community organising can all come together, how we can utilise our respective power, skills and experience to work towards our shared vision of a social care system in which both workers and those that use services are truly valued and ensure dignity, respect and autonomy, you know, and how we work together in a way that is meaningful and that is effective. You know, I'm really excited by the work of Act for Inclusion and how it's sort of brought together these different groups in an attempt to sort of begin to map out an inspiring alternative that we can be really rallying around. I'm part of the Unite Housing Workers branch, and they've been doing they have a sort of similar project of connecting trade union and community struggles. So they work closely with SHAC, which stands for Social Housing Action Group, and that's a network of tenants, workers and housing activists who are campaigning to improve the lives of social housing tenants. And I think that similarly sort of demonstrates how labour and community groups can work together, acknowledging the interconnectedness of their struggles and work towards shared goals. I've also been sort of quite interested recently in the practice of bargaining for the common good. And that's when industrial disputes, people use industrial disputes as a chance to make demands that benefit not just workers, but also the wider community. So for example, in 2019, in Chicago, teachers went on strike and their demands included, you know, more affordable housing and protections for undocumented migrants. You know, I think part of what we need to be thinking about is what that looks like in social care. You know, what demands could we be making of workers? You know, how do we, through our labour activism, achieve not just better paying conditions for ourselves, but also play a key role in radically transforming the social care sector? I think we are already having these sorts of discussions on a small scale just in my workplace. because I think, you know, we want better pay, but we also want our organisation to be better for those that use the services we work in. You know, we want the tools and knowledge needed to actually be helpful. You know, recently me and my other Unite members at my workplace have been talking about organising around training. And I think this could be an area where we could be making some exciting demands, like rather than just e-learnings on the Care Act, we could be taught, you know, the social model of disability or the history of the disabled people's movement. You know, my organisation likes to talk about being, you know, trauma informed and likes to reference co-production. But really what that means is it is briefly mentioned in a couple of paragraphs of a 50-page booklet we read in our first week. I think we should be calling out employers who reduce important practices to buzzwords used to impress commissioners, and actually demand that they follow through on the promises of their brochures and give us the resources and skills we need to embed these approaches into our work. Within a national independent living service, my job likely would not exist, or if it did, it would be completely unrecognisable, and I think that's really exciting. You know, I'm excited about the sorts of jobs that social care's replacement might contain. But you know, whatever those jobs are, we do need to make sure that that workforce is properly rewarded, that it's resourced with the knowledge and tools it needs to do its job with skill and care, that it is well rested and that it's listened to, and that its mental health and well-being is cared for. We also need a workforce with the time and money for a life outside of work, for time, you know, that has time for friends and family and community and leisure and recuperation. Because I think when low pay means you have to work a 6-day week to make ends meet, you know, that sort of thing is a luxury. But yeah, I thank you so much for sort of having me today, and I'm really looking forward to the sort of future conversations we're all going to be having together.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, you're absolutely right. There has to be balance in life between work and home and the things that we need to do to make us happy and keep us healthy and keep our well-being really good. So yeah, I mean, I think all these discussions that we're speakers that we're speaking tonight, these discussions do need to be continued, and I think that's something that Act for Inclusion will be doing in the future. So thank you very much, Billy, for that. Now we're just going to have a 5-minute break, but after the 5-minute break, Alison is going to launch our new logo, and we're going to have Gordon Peters talk about co-production. Dorothy Gold is going to talk about survivors of mental health and her foundation called her foundation. So we've got some other really big, interesting speakers and conversations to have. So 5 minutes and then we'll all come back and continue. Thank you.
I have a picture of the logo. Thanks very much, Sandra. Do we have a picture of the logo?
We do.
Wonderful. Maybe. I'm really excited and really privileged to speak to our new logo. Most of the people in this room should have seen the logo before because we've been discussing it for the last couple of months, and we took feedback on the logo at our last meeting. The logo was designed by Dave Lupton, aka Crippen. Crippen is a disabled cartoonist who has been in the vanguard of the disability arts movement, having decades of experience of producing art using the social model of disability as a lens. The image is colourful and eye-catching. The image is easily recognisable and is standalone. It portrays our image of our diverse communities and working together as equals. And we'll actually get an opportunity to take our logo onto the streets and into our communities on Saturday, where we are having a day of action in London, Manchester, Birmingham and Liverpool, and finally beginning to talk to our communities about the aims and the vision and the strategy of Act for Inclusion and our eco-social vision of social support in the future. So thank you very much. It's a real privilege to speak to this. I wanted to be quick just because the speakers today have been so excellent, and we have some more exciting speakers following the break. So thanks very much, and I hope you like the logo as much as the membership of A4I do. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Alison. So yeah, Alison's right. We've got to get on with it because we've got more really good speakers. So the next person who's going to speak, and this is going to be about co-production, why it's necessary, is Gordon Peters. So over to you, Gordon.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, all right, Sandra.
Yeah, I can
Good.
hear you fine. Great, you're on. You can see you as well.
Fine, thanks very much. Okay, I'm going to talk about why co-production is necessary. I think firstly, the thing to say is that a lot has been lost, and Mark and others have alluded to that. I think we're going backwards in so many ways, and it's worth perhaps mentioning initially, social work in its widest sense didn't always take the status quo for granted as the last resort that people turned to. In fact, we didn't call it co-production then, but 50 years ago when I joined social work, the way back, there was a critique and a desire, critique of the current bureaucratic system as it was then, much worse now, and a desire for social work which challenges the continuation of disadvantage and circumstances which exclude people. That's why we went into social work, to critique what was going on and the bureaucratism of welfare in particular. But the bureaucratism of welfare is very much worse now than it was in the 1970s, when there was a case-con critique, which I and other people like Cressy Canan and Peter Leonard and Mark Oliver, in fact, were all partly involved in. Some people will know about these people. So much of workers' time is now on complex form keeping, not seeing people at all, which social work had been about. And there's very little time left to see people face to face. And the preventive rationale of support before a crisis, dealing with the barriers as they come up, and barriers that is the right word for them, has been ditched with both the moral panic on abuse, the scapegoating, and the defunding, the huge cuts with political acceptance of social work and social support as a residual last resort. That's what it's been reduced to. Rather than what some of us believed and still believe and think we could re-engineer, social means of support of self-determination of all, which people from the first speaker onwards have talked about. That's what social work and professional social work ought to be about. The social means of support and social self-determination for everyone, no matter their vulnerability or no matter their complex difficulties. So, how to recreate something better in the current context, given so much has been lost. And it's important to emphasize that things were in fact better, even if they were in need of much criticism as well. So if it's a movement towards building in co-production, I think we are beginning to see a sort of movement, or co-design or co-creation, and different words are used, as a key component of social services. And I use the term social services, not social care, as it has become known, because I think social services is a less laden term. It's about public service, social services, and it need not be paternalistic to provide a service. It could be jointly provided by users and professionals. The CARE Act, in fact, in a small way, but it is a start, actually notes co-production as something that should be a component of all social care practice nowadays. Now, for what that's worth, it's not transformational. I'll come on to the transformational bit, but it does open up the delivery of services, both to scrutiny by those who are supposedly on the receiving end, in quotes, and to the actual real life discussion around the table as equals, and what kind of care or support is best and how it's best designed. Does this lead to transformation? Not necessarily, but it opens up the possibilities. So one can think, as you do in the green climate challenge world, of a just transition. So one could think of a just transition to a much better way of doing things, which could be transformational. I agree with a lot of Mark's analysis, but the point is, how do we get there from where we are now? How or where does power and control change? Well, the New Economics Foundation, in their definition of co-production, give 6 things: people as assets, equal partners, not burdens or beneficiaries, Secondly, building on capabilities, supporting what people, whoever they are able to do for mutual benefit. Thirdly, reciprocal relations of support, mutuality between professionals and carers, rather than it just being a transaction. Fourthly, peer support networks. We need to build these alongside support from professionals. Now, I talk as an ex-social worker and director of social services in the 80s who believed in support networks and peer support. That's what we were trying to do at the same time as perhaps trying to declutter the bureaucracy of which we were part. Fifthly, blurring the delivery receiving boundary. If you blur that boundary between providers and users, more gets done, and you need a kind of social dialogue to do that. I'll come on to that. And then lastly, facilitating, helping people engineer their own lives. That's what the New Economics Foundation says. Co-production then is sharing power to plan and run services. There is something called the National Co-Production Critical Friends Group, which you can find in the Social Care Institute for Excellence website. And that's their definition, sharing power to plan and run services. What I'm saying is that opening up through users and carers being equal around the table with the professionals is the way into that. It's only the way in. A lot more then has to be done. So it's not just about engagement. It's not just about consultation. It's not just about feedback. It's not just about surveys. It's about influencing the process and outcomes. Now, influencing doesn't necessarily transform, but it is a transitional way to raise the key issues and then change the nature of what is actually being discussed and what's being provided. So influencing is, I would suggest, a transition towards something more transformational. If it does not challenge power and money inequality a priori, and co-production doesn't necessarily yet do that, it can be a vehicle for disputing the overload or the bias or the patronage of those in charge. And it can put alternatives. But of course, it could also be a vehicle, and this has been mentioned, like greenwash, where authorities, and I've coined the word care wash, and end up in tokenism and rhetoric, which denies or downplays the realities of people's lives. So any co-production or co-design setup has to be aware of both tendencies, to open things up or just to be a rhetorical device. We have to work through this dynamic through the use of social dialogue, accountability reports, recall, budget reviews in which services are as involved as those who pay for them or deliver them.
Gordon, Gordon, can I just ask you if you want your slides up? Do you want us to put up your slides you sent up on the screen?
There is, I've given other different links. There is only one slide, which is the definition we've used in Haringey. So if you put that up, that might be useful while I'm talking. Yeah.
Okay.
It's on the structure we have in Haringey. Yeah. The first thing is you need a structure with written rules about who does what and which can be made accountable. And if you go down that slide, you'll see that we had a structure in Haringey, and we still have with a planning and oversight group. It's been renamed, but there's a steering group with key stakeholders, to use that term, are actually involved, and reports are made to it. You need to further down onto
Gordon, I think you might be having papers over your.
Sorry, yep, my mistake. So social dialogue, however you have it and however you structure it, is that this is a key point. It's the dynamic of continuing engagement over who's making the decisions, who benefits and loses, and how users and carers continue to be fully involved, determining how they live. And the co-production process, or the steering group, or whatever you call it, is a structure for that, and it cements it in with terms of reference and so on. I think two important facets here. It's very useful for the change process in any transformation to know how the inside works. And that's how it's useful to have people, I know, like Bob, who's on this call, who's been employed by local authority, and others, I'm sure, or myself, who was previously a director in Hackney in the 80s, knowing how the inside works as allies of people who are users and carers and can often be blindsided by all the sort of terminology and various other ruses which professionals might have to stay in charge. And secondly, we can build in the learning through working together, professionals and users, so that professionals as much as users actually learn something new and they learn something about each other. So that's something about what it is and something about the Haringey process, which I'll just mention very quickly. The forward plan, including the recruitment of experts by experience, the recruitment process itself, defining the skill sets, can have users and carers on panels who recruit professionals. The commissioning process can have outcomes and service specifications, panels for selection and review and monitoring. And the buildings that are being built or being used can have functional specialist involvement involved in value engineering and discussions and reducing costs alongside users and carers, so there's no obfuscation of what's happening. So in various stages of what's provided, the planning, the recruitment, the commissioning, the buildings, for instance, and in Haringey, we've used that for a new £35 million nursing home and community resource centre that's being built as a result of a campaign to stop the closure of the nursing home that was there. So we've turned our closure campaign into a much more active and funded redesign process from start to finish of a 75 bed, it's too big, but it's the best compromise we could get, nursing home and home for people who've been homeless, a carer support centre and an all-comers lounge and other facilities locally, and local people and users and carers are involved in every process of that. The day centres have been designed with learning disabled people involved, and the home care contracts were changed with fewer contractors and the ethical care charter of Unison as part of what the new contractors would have to do as a result of users and carers being involved in home care co-production. So there's things you can do. The Social Care Institute for Excellence talks about Oxfordshire, where they say they're embedding co-production so that it becomes the way the council works. I don't know how that's worked out in practice, but it's certainly a good aim to have. And Mark has mentioned Hammersmith and Fulham, which have gone further than most authorities so far in making co-production something that sort of works across the authority. We haven't yet done that in Haringey, but that's a very bold move by Hammersmith and Fulham, and I think others should follow. You need a senior level commitment, you need co-production training, you need establishing a co-production board or a steering group and resourcing it. For instance, a co-production team, apparently Oxford have one, actually funded for that work, and a written agreement and income and resource support for people who are users or carers who take part in the process so that they are at least remunerated for what they do. That can help raise the national profile. It can be an organic approach. It can support and upskill the staff themselves, get more satisfaction from what they're doing. And apparently Oxfordshire have a handbook of co-production, which might be worth checking out. And it can develop the right mindset amongst staff, and the CQC is even taking notice. So some progress is being made. There are difficulties about complexity, change fatigue, not always being a priority for hard-pressed senior staff, time and resources, and the legal and political alignment don't always tie up with co-production aims. But these are difficulties that get surfaced and then have to be dealt with.
Gordon, could you say one more minute, please?
Yep. So as the Care Act actually opens the door and says co-production should take place. That's a minimal statement. The Social Care Institute for Excellence says people should be equal partners around the table. That's better. And they have 4 principles of equality, diversity, access, and reciprocity. Islington has a set of rules for co-production, a recognition of the time and money. Birmingham is making it real. Manchester and others have been mentioned. So there's a number of initiatives going on across the country as an alternative to the moving backwards show, which has been going on in social services since it became social care and started being privatized. And I'd make a plea for an eco-social model. Finally, I think it is about healing the ruptures that have taken place and that do take place in people's lives. And the rupture from the natural world, like the alienation from working for a terrible bureaucracy, they're all ruptures in the mutual well-being of people. So well-being, sustainability, and good relational lives are the beginnings of an eco-social model that has been talked about by Lena Dominelli and Heather Beto and others, and I've given some references for that. So there are people academically talking about it as well, but it's basically about healing the ruptures, and the best of social work and professional life could be about that, as some of us who entered it many, many decades ago felt it should be, and that's why I'd like to be on board with it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for that. Really good, thank you. And again, we want to set up a co-production subgroup, so we need to talk about co-production more and more. Right. Now I'm going to hand over to Dorothy, and Dorothy is a survivor of mental health system and the founder of Liberty. So over to Dorothy.
Sandra, and it's great to be here to speak today. And as you'll be aware, I'm going to talk about independent living in relation to the current mental health system. I particularly appreciate the invitation to be here because although those of us who experience mental distress and mental trauma are also very much disabled by society, and so have also been fighting for human rights, it's only fairly recently that we've been recognised within the disabled people's movement more generally. As I'm sure most of you know, the usual approach to mental distress and mental trauma is to give us psychiatric diagnoses and then to provide clinical input, very often psychiatric drugs. We're also commonly seen as people who are at risk of harming ourselves or others, and at the same time as often not capable of making sound decisions for ourselves. For that reason, we're frequently locked up in psychiatric hospitals and treated against our will, most often with psychiatric drugs. We may also be released from hospital under community treatment orders, which set out what conditions we have to meet to be allowed back into the community. All this comes under the powers of the Mental Health Act 1983, and much of it will continue under the proposals in the Mental Health Act White Paper, which came out at the start of this year. The government has strongly oversold the amount of difference which the White Paper will make, and both the Act and the White Paper strongly affects people with learning difficulties as well. Taking us into hospital against our will and forcibly treating us is said to be done in the name of care, on the basis that we lack capacity and so need protecting against ourselves. But there are all sorts of problems with a psychiatric approach and with the assumptions on which it rests. Like other disabled people, the roots of our distress and trauma stem essentially from the whole way in which society runs, from poverty levels, poor housing, inadequate opportunities for education and employment, the benefit system, serious failures to deal with climate change, domestic violence, sexual abuse, discrimination based on factors such as class, gender, ethnicity, age, and sexual orientation. As I'm sure you'll be aware, abuse and violence against women continues to rise, still more so against disabled women. The same is true for many other groups, for example, Black men and Black women. Giving us psychiatric diagnoses and putting us in institutions instead of dealing with these fundamental issues just doesn't help us. And there's the same problem with forcing us to take psychiatric drugs instead of dealing with the fundamental causes of our trauma. In addition, there's growing evidence that psychiatric diagnoses are ill-founded and that psychiatric drugs have at most a limited effectiveness, whilst at the same time causing major physical damage. Not surprisingly, therefore, the numbers of people experiencing mental distress and mental trauma are rising alarmingly, not decreasing. That's because what's offered falls well short of what's needed, and helpful alternatives for which many of us are pleading are mainly ignored. Many of us who experience mental distress and mental trauma have also been hugely damaged by the mental health system. You'll have noticed that I call myself a survivor of it, because that was my experience of it. Being locked up in a psychiatric hospital and forcibly treated is traumatizing in itself. And that happens just when you're most low and most needing a warm, homely setting, and people who ask you what would help and provide that help, instead of wrongly treating you as someone who can't express any meaningful views and who therefore needs to be forced to accept what clinicians decide. Like many other disabled people, what we want instead is the right to live in community settings, just like all other members of society, not to be institutionalized. We need as well an end to the idea that we're more dangerous than other people. The reality, in fact, is that we are far more likely to be abused or killed by others than to be violent ourselves. That is what needs addressing. We also need a government that tackles the injustices in society, not one that attributes our distress and trauma to us having a chemical imbalance in our brains. Seeing us as having something wrong with our brains just means that the government doesn't have to address the underlying causes of mental distress and trauma. The ever-rising distress and trauma won't go away unless the government deals with underlying causes. What so many of us who experience mental distress and trauma strongly want is a government that respects our full human rights under the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People. That's why I've set up Liberation, to campaign for the rights in that convention for people experiencing mental distress and trauma. The convention is absolutely clear that making decisions for us on the basis that we, in quotes, lack capacity, involuntary detention in psychiatric hospitals and forced treatment, including community treatment orders, are a fundamental breach of human rights. Similarly, we should not be placed in forms of residential care, which are institutional in themselves, or subject to a social care system which is not run on independent living principles. The convention is equally clear that what should be in place for people in mental distress and trauma, as well as for other disabled people, is independent living in the community based on our choices, together with whatever support we need to live in and take part in the community. Will then also be able to offer the full and rich range of insights, strengths and skills which we have to contribute to society. As people with experience of mental distress and trauma, we would so much like to have full scope to contribute in this way. Let's all fight together for a just society. It will be tremendous if you give us your support, and we very strongly want to support you as our disabled colleagues. Thank you.
Wow, thank you for that, Dorothy. It was really good. Now I'm going to move on to the general discussion section of our agenda. And the general discussion is, for people to make comments, maybe add things to the discussion. So at the moment, I've got Vivian. Vivian's hand's been up for a while, so I'm going to call Vivian in. And then after Vivian, Andrew Lee, who is the director of People First, which is a self-advocacy project for and by learning disabled people, also wants to speak. So Vivian first, then Andrew Lee. Thank you. You're on mute.
I didn't put my hand up. I don't know why it's up.
Oh, okay.
I've been trying to make notes on what everybody said. It's a great meeting, and I'm really interested in everything everyone's saying, but I didn't want to add to it. Not at this point.
I seen your hand up a while ago, so I thought I'd call you.
Okay. Well, it can go down then.
Okay.
Do I need to put it down?
It's gone now.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I'll go to Andrew Lee, because Andrew indicated during the break that he had some things he wanted to contribute to the meeting.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm Director of People First Self-Advocacy, which is the national user-led organisation run and controlled by people with learning difficulties. And I have a staff team of 8. We've been running a group for people with learning difficulties and autism during the COVID crisis. And we ran a conference in a Learning Disability Week called Out in Front. One of the barriers that we've identified is digital exclusion. With everything kind of going online from applying for, not just applying for benefits, but simple things like actually making sure that you kind of get the support that you want. Some of the speakers have actually spoken about care. Actually, we prefer to use the term support, because if you're supporting someone to actually get money out of a cash machine, for example, because they can't reach the cash point because of their height, is that act support, or is it care? People have hopes, aspirations and dreams, and over the last 20 years I feel that government policy has actually stamped on, isolated, cut off and forgotten about people with learning difficulties. And we really need to grab our political class by the political balls, kind of give them a real good squeeze, because they are talking about us as if we are not there. We need to be around the decision-making table. So what can you do right now? You can actually ask your local authority to be around the decision-making table. By people with lived experience being around the decision-making table, we can then actually get a chance of making things fit for purpose, not to fit a balance sheet. People in the one of the things that the COVID-19 Action Support Group talked about was the closure of adult treatment units. There was an act in 2014 where the government actually said that they would close all adult treatment units. And that's where abuse is actually happening. It's not just the actual amount of deaths that have actually taken place during COVID that is appalling, but it is also the abuse that goes unseen unheard in the actual institutions that the local authorities are sending us to, and we are cut off from friends and family. In some cases, there was one particular case where a father and mother went on a drive for 2.5 hours, and all they could do is reach through a letterbox and hold their daughter's hand. The only form of communication that they actually had with their daughter was actually by text. And the system that the local authority was paying this place, I won't call it home because it wasn't, it was more like a prison. We need to find a way of what kind of standards do we want people with learning difficulties and the wider disability movement to live in the 21st century? What kind of, it's not just about us being around the table, but what kind of experience, what kind of knowledge, what kind of expertise do we have around that table? And it's about decision makers actually accepting and acknowledging our individual skills, knowledge, aspirations, and share. We're not going to take no for a natural answer. A very inspirational person, my grandfather, said to me when I was 10, he said, Andrew, if you put your mind to it, anything is possible, and never take no for an actual answer. So what can we do right now? We can, one of the things that the COVID...
Andrew, just one more minute, is that okay?
One of the things that the COVID group have called on is that when the media want to actually talk about all of the actual support issues and everything that we've been talking about today, they need to be interviewing and talking to people with learning difficulties, people with mental health distress, people with all those actual experiences, rather than going to the organizations that say they'll speak for us. They don't have a right. They do not have a right. And we need to actually put them in their place very nicely, but we need to put them in their place if we're going to actually make sure that the 21st century is a lot more of a much respectful place to live in than the 20th and 19th century was.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much. Obviously, I completely agree with you, and I think it's only by working together and trusting each other that things will change. We'll get this corrupt system that we have needs to change, and that's how we've got to do it. So thank you very much for that, Andrew. Is there anybody with a comment? I can't see any hands up just before I move on. We haven't got a lot of time, so yeah, doesn't seem to be. So I'm going to...
Sandra, I think Dean was trying to...
Oh, sorry. So I can
Hi,
see
Sandra.
Dean, and then is there Beverly? I think Beverly's got a hand up. If you could stick to 1 minute, I'd really
Oh, yeah,
appreciate.
definitely. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you very, very much. I mean, really enjoyed tonight. I've not been to any meetings for a while, but this AGM and the launch of Inclusion for All, it's been really, really good. And the speakers have all been excellent. And I want to say thank you to all of the speakers, as I'm sure you'll do at the end, Sandra. You know, it's been an absolutely wonderful, wonderful evening. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for those words of support. Thank you. Okay, Beverly, very quickly, 1 minute, if you can, Beverly.
Yeah. Hi, good evening. Yeah, I'd just like to say we also have to try and change the views of professional people as well. It's not, I mean, I've had a social worker that said to my husband, I'm 52, have you thought about putting your wife in a home? Now, that attitude is coming from a qualified social worker, so it's minds of people who are already in the profession. their minds have to be changed and educated that, that is not an option to be saying to a 52-year-old, you need to go in a home. So their views need to be, they need to be retrained on the way that we're now thinking. Why should we have to go in a home just because I'm disabled and my condition? I would live in the smaller that stage. And if it did come to that stage, I'd be staying at home with support in my own home because that's my choice. Social workers should not be making those choices for people with disabilities. It's not their choice to make, it's my choice to make. And every person with a disability, it's their choice, nobody else's choice what we do and our care.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. We need to start talking to professionals, and you're right, bring them on board. So the last person to speak on this section will be Steve Grabby. So over to Steve. You there, Steve? Where's Steve gone? Did you want to speak, Steve?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Very, very quiet.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I didn't, sorry.
Oh, muted. Sorry, you're muted. Hang on, we're going to unmute you. You're muted at the moment, Steve.
I've sent him a thing to unmute. I don't know why it's not working.
Can you unmute, Steve?
I'm trying to unmute, so I don't seem to be able to.
No, you're
unmuted now. Done.
Can you? Okay. I've got a couple of very short things I wanted to say in response to a couple of the things and then a question. Gordon's presentation on co-production was interesting, but I have to say the example that he gave of co-production in Haringey of a big new nursing home, that sounds to me like an example of how co-production isn't necessarily a good thing, because surely that's the kind of institution that most of us here are essentially trying to abolish. So I think we need to be careful that co-production, there's what we're co-producing as well as co-production as a process, and that's also an important dimension of it. The other thing was Dorothy was talking about that. I mean, I agree that many people are very badly harmed by psychiatric diagnoses and the prescription of psychiatric drugs. But I do also know a lot of people who have found drugs and diagnoses helpful, but who would also be extremely critical of everything else that you talked about, how the system denies people choices and institutionalizes people. So I would like to argue that, yes, I know this is going into engaging with the realm of health and medicine itself, which perhaps is something many of us don't really want to engage with, but that I think, people actually having access to drugs if they are helpful on an informed consent basis should also be part of support for independent living and for people to have choice control over their lives. I wouldn't want to totally demonize medical treatments in themselves. The issue for me is not the drugs as such, it's the fact that they're forced on people. And then my question was, I believe it was Alison who said something about launch events happening in, was it London, Birmingham, Manchester and Liverpool? Are there any dates for these, and are we going to get any details?
Okay, thanks for that, Steve. So I'm going to just go to Gordon and then Dorothy and then obviously for Alison to explain more about the postcard event that Steve's talking about. Okay, so do you want to go first, Gordon, and then Dorothy?
Yeah, I take the point. In fact, I worked in deinstitutionalization in all sorts of places as a consultant after I stopped being a director, getting people out of institutions, and group homes are no better than big ones. I take all that completely. for everyone who can possibly live in one. But my point is nursing homes are actually for people who have such physically complex needs that they, as well as their family or relatives, accept that they cannot actually, in some cases, live at home, or there's nobody prepared to or able to look after them sufficiently in their own home, if they still have one. So it's a fact that we cannot abolish all nursing homes any more than we can abolish all hospitals or hospices. There need to be some places of resort for people who have very complex needs and are willing to be there on their own terms, supported by others. That is not to say that we shouldn't deinstitutionalize all the terrible mental health hospitals and learning disabilities institutions that currently exist. I completely with all that, but there will be some places, and this is a nursing home I mentioned, which will actually have local people doing local things side by side. The nursing home people will mix with other, and so on and so on. It's not a shut away place, it's the opposite. It's to have an open face to the community for people who agree themselves that they cannot live anywhere else.
Okay, so Dorothy's got hand up, and Dorothy, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just really quickly wanted to respond to Steve, and I mean, many thanks for your point, Steve. I just wanted to clarify that I'm not saying people shouldn't opt for a diagnosis and drugs, you know, if that's their choice. What I was wanting to do was to highlight that what we actually need is, you know, a full social model as opposed to a sort of dominant medical model. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, thanks, Dorothy. Now, Alison, Steve mentioned the postcard campaign we're running in Birmingham, Manchester and Liverpool. So do you want to say a little bit about that, just to explain a bit more?
Yes, so Act for Inclusion have created some new postcards. I think the tagline is Boris's illusion, Act for Inclusion, and Bob is waving them at the screen. So basically they explain a little bit about the eco-social model and the services that we're fighting for and deserve. And so on the 30th of October in Manchester and Birmingham, I think everyone's going out on the same day. There's 4 different events starting to start the conversation around, you know, these services. And also we've spoken tonight about some complex themes. The world is complicated. Social support services are complicated. So it's about us beginning that conversation, seeing what works and how we can start engaging our communities in joining us to fight for, you know, a new vision of social support in our communities and our wider society. So there are, I know in Manchester, we are meeting at 1 p.m. and going into the centre of Manchester, hopefully with a megaphone, but also armed with the postcards. I can't tell you the event, the times and details of the other events. I hope this is one of many kind of days of, you know, us all going out together and sampling, you know, how it's going down, how we can ensure that our message is clear. And as I said, it's complicated, and trying to explain this to people is going to take time, and also we're going to have to learn from our experiences. So I don't know if all the times have been circulated for those groups, but I'm sure if you're in one of those cities and want to meet up with some Act for Inclusion members and friends, then we can definitely sort that out. We're going out at 1 o'clock in the centre of Manchester in Piccadilly Gardens. I couldn't tell you the details of the other ones, but maybe after this meeting we could collate the details of that and then get it sent out to everyone on this call, because it'd be really nice to meet some other people on this call too. So thanks.
Okay, that'll be good. I think that's the way forward, isn't it, for us to get all that together and send it out to everybody. So thank you for that. I hope that's made it a bit clearer, Steve. Now I'm going to move on to actually moving forward. So Act for Inclusion, moving forward, and its subgroup. So I'm handing over to Bob Williams-Finlay, who's going to speak on this as the engagement officer.
As Alison just said, we are dealing with very complex issues. And in March, when we had our AGM, we adopted a new vision and a new strategy. And most of our speakers related to our strategy. However, we're still a small group. We're still lacking in resources. So maybe our treasurer will give it a minute to ask for funding before we leave. But one way we want to work is through subgroups. And at the moment, we've got 4 priority areas. One is co-production. We want to look at what is going on there, what is good and what is bad practice, and try and put it together to put forward our ideas on how we can integrate some of these practice ideas in moving the agenda forward. We also have from Billy tonight, who's a trade unionist. And one of the ways we want to make sure this is on the agenda is to involve the trade unions. So Alison is the convener on our subgroup trying to work with trade unions. Each subgroup has its own remit to work on. The third group that may be set up is the Primor at the AGM successfully got through a motion supporting the national campaign against charges for services. And we want to look at whether we want something within Act for Inclusion that would support the vote at the national campaign. And finally, we realize that we need to bring people together around our vision, around community service support. And therefore, a lot of this work is done by unpaid carers, family members, and friends who support older and disabled people. And safeguarding became a real issue during the pandemic. And another possible subgroup is to look at how we can better involve, inform, and work with informal carers and supporters. Now, we want to populate these subgroups, so we want to invite our members to join the subgroup. But we want to do more than that. If you aren't sure about being a member of Up for Inclusion yet, and that doesn't stop you if you're interested in working with us. And we would like to hear from you if you do want to get involved in any of the 4 subgroups. And we will be putting up details about the subgroup on our website and Facebook page. Thanks, Sandra.
Thanks for that, Bob. So there's lots of work to do, and we need people to join us, get involved in our subgroups, because, you know, we've got a massive opportunity here, a really good opportunity to start to, you know, get to progress this vision that we've got, which is obviously a very transformative vision. And tonight we've seen that we've got some really good partners. We're in good company. So I want to say thank you to all the speakers. I mean, really, we could have had you all individually to speak at a meeting and discussed around it and had a massive, big, wide discussion. But we will, you know, I think we'll be inviting you back if you're prepared to come. But thank you very much for coming to the launch. And I'm really looking forward to working with everybody. And I think we've got a really good future ahead. So thank you very much, everyone. Unless there's a person that wants to make one more comment.
Dave Nichols.
Okay, Dave Nichols. Okay, Dave is our treasurer. So do you want to close the meeting, Dave? Is Dave here?
Sorry, me duck. Yes, I was. I was just get my computer to restart, as they always were. They do like freezing up on you just at the moment when they want to spoil.
So you've got 1 minute, Dave.
Well, to be quite honest, there's not an awful lot I can add. Being the mere treasurer to the group, to be quite honest, because after all, at the end of the day, you know, it's the members that are the experts in all of this and have done most of the hard work on this. So I shall keep things simple and say, please join us.
Yeah, and I think we've got to start looking at different ways of raising money and obviously getting. So that's something I think that we need to think about for another meeting and maybe have some full discussions around that. Anne Bannister's got a hand up, and then we'll go.
Yeah, all I wanted to say was that people can join on the website. There's forms there. We'll attempt to get an email out very quickly after this meeting with details of where the activity is and a link to the video as well of this, the recording that we've done, so that people can go back and look at the speeches again or send it on to other people. So yes, thank you everybody for coming, and please do get involved.
We put a link to the website into the chat.
Okay, we'll do that then. Okay, because the meeting is now, we're slightly over, 1 minute over. So I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you everybody for coming, and hope to see you all soon. Okay, bye. Thanks,
Sandra.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Excellent
you.
meeting. Excellent meeting.